And the comptroller's office says, you know, our process for setting our tax rate involves first making a budget, then seeing how much tax it's gonna take to meet the budget. In the manual, it points out that the making of a budget is not a legislative mandate. But you can't really get to where you wanna go without having a budget, but having a budget is not anything that's mandated by statute. So we don't actually have to technically have a budget. So, having said that, when we have a budget, it's a tool to help us track what we're doing, and when it's done, it's done. And I looked last night through the year-to-dates, and now I'm feeling better because I have a whole year's worth of data to look at. And it tells me that in some areas we did better than we budgeted, and in some areas we didn't do as good as we budgeted. And it is what it is. It's now a historical document that says we planned this and this is what it actually happened. And I don't see the point in going back and trying to officially amend
Something that's already
something that's, it's a historical document now. It is what this is what we planned, this is how the plans worked or didn't work, and now we can use it as we did to create next year's budget. But I don't personally see wasting the board's time with going back and trying to amend everything that has already happened.
I agree with that, but at the same time, I am a little bit uncomfortable that we don't have our liabilities shown clearly in the budget for next year. And I think that's where we need to amend the budget for the upcoming year. I don't see going back and cleaning up something that happened.
I'm not big on tearing statutes
Yeah.
down, so.
You're not big on what?
Tearing statutes down.
Same stuff.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to have the liabilities clearly shown.
I agree with what you said, except for our own planning purposes. How do we know, from a business perspective, how do we know if we're on target for our spending without, not officially, I agree, not officially amending the budget, but giving a.
Yes, I agree. It's not good business to not have a budget. And we couldn't have even set a tax rate realistically without one, because we have to have a plan. And in connection with that, I think that at the 6-month mark, we need to have a little workshop and measure how we are doing, so we can make adjustments if we need to for the remainder of the year.
You think 6 months is a little too long out there? Because if we're way off target, oh my gosh.
Well, we look at it every month anyway,
Yeah.
but to have an actual workshop. That was the recommendation in the state literature that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
They recommend that at 6 months you formally look at it, although we monitor it monthly.
One thing concerns me is that we have, all the tax money coming in all at once. And that's what we're banking on, but then by the time August and September, or August rolls around, we may be a little bit short if we don't take care of budget the money the tax money as it comes in.
So how will we, so would we just print I'm thinking of the process, print the budget and every so often look at it and see if we're on target, or how do
Yeah,
we?
well, this is what they provide us.
Oh, that's right,
every
the
month.
working, yeah.
They're showing us for the month and then for
Sure.
the year to date, and
That's
we're
right.
looking at it at every meeting. So I think we're covering our bases on that.
But this does not show our liabilities. And that's the shortcoming, I think, in
Do you know anything about putting liabilities within a budget? Liabilities do not show up on P&L. And when we say liabilities, we're talking about like your social security taxes, your federal withholding taxes that's withheld out of an employee's job. How do you budget for that? How do you put that into a budget?
You guess, because you don't, they vary so damn much.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to,
You get a guideline for it.
well, it's gonna be a percentage of what you're budgeting
budget
your
is.
labor.
Well, I
Yeah, that's
understand,
what
like on
varies.
federal withholding, his withholding is gonna be different than his. You know, that and it's based off of income, Of course, this week you may make more than you did last week. You know, you may hold 0 dependents and he may hold 3. So, I mean,
You may claim single, he may claim zero.
Doesn't that come out of the employee's check?
yes.
Doesn't come out of, I mean, you're already budgeted.
Well,
for it.
It's already,
It's
We're already budgeting for our portion of it.
No, but I mean, even the payroll, the employee's getting paid. Then you take that money out of their money, so you already got it into their
Yes,
payroll.
but that's not the way it's happening. That's not the way it's happening.
Well, that was an error on the office's
Well, but I
part.
think too,
That
that,
wasn't,
I think
it was
it's.
budgeted in there because it was
But
the employee's money. It's not our money, once that's paid.
The district's
Well,
expense, like,
And
account number 210, Social Security, you know, we budgeted $24,000. That's our part, like, of the matching towards the employees.
Yeah, is that budget, is the matching budgeted in there? The matching, I
Yes,
don't
right here.
Where's, give me a
Yes.
number.
210 and 234.
Oh, so that is,
We pay Medicare and we pay Social Security. That is what the employer is responsible for. And then everything else is withheld out of the employee's check.
Like in a whole lot of our stuff, nobody here works 9 to 5.
No.
It's very hard to schedule something when you got hours fluctuate so much, and that's where it's that old wag guess, but just a wild ass guess. You don't know. There's no way to nail it down. If you nail it down, then when you say you're gonna have to call somebody and say, don't come in, you know, we run up to this. I mean, you can do it that way. I've seen it done. You know, you're just effectively shutting down. And if you wanna work that way, you can, but that's the only way to get a hard rock budget on a deal like we're doing here. But like I said, we're always a year behind on everything, on whether it's our money coming in, whether it's our schedules, and you just don't know. That's what makes it, to me, that's what makes it tough to say this is what our budget's gonna be.
well, that's true, except you're looking here, it figures that are pretty consistent across several years, but then we're talking about $82,000 too.
Right.
I mean, we could deal with this, but dealing with that 82,000 is gonna be a little different.
And we do have a figure for that, penalties and interest.
And I'm not confident about the way we're handling that problem on this budget.
Nor am I.
I don't have a suggestion on how to fix it, but I'm just not confident about how I see it portrayed on the current budget. So anybody have any ideas?
that's still from last year's budget. That money, I mean, it's gonna probably come out, well, cause that money we received is from, actually the year before.
15 cents.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's Robin Peters, pay Paul, I mean,
yeah. I think we just need to get the facts, nailed down to the penny, and then come back in here in a public meeting and deal with it.
and I have some question about whether or not there's another way to handle it through, we were talking about doing it through Intuit, where that money goes into a separate account some way, so that it doesn't remain in the general fund, so that it's put aside and we don't touch it ever, so that you know it's there. And I have an idea that there's a way of doing that through the accounting program they're using, and I don't know how to do it.
Okay. Be a phone call. I mean, like we told you earlier.
Mhm.
I don't know. So.
I don't know.
Well, I know what you're talking about, and it would be, I mean, when you come up with that, and you gotta come with that money, where do you want to be a shortfall? I mean, is it gonna be in the rest of your
choose the
budget?
thing, yeah,
But shortfall in the federal government, that's not never really a good idea.
yeah.
And I understand this, and I wouldn't be objected to having that money set aside each month, and if we're short, then we're gonna have to go back in there and find where we can cut in our other part of our budget, not the federal
But
requirement.
every time there's a paycheck that's written,
Yeah.
that money ought to
That
go
money's set aside.
into a separate account.
Immediately.
I can go for that, I understand that really well. Cause it is, I mean, rest of them, they can complain about you, but the government, they can do more than complain.
Yeah.
how do we account for interest and penalties and things on the budget? How do we account for that
We don't have
in
any.
our profit and loss? We don't have anything on it. So I don't see, I'm not seeing a true picture, honestly.
Where do we have interest and penalties right now?
I don't know. I don't know if we have them.
There's nothing in the
Oh, where do
budget.
we have them? On the IRS and the,
Well, yeah, but we're hoping that that's all gonna be waived.
well.
Only thing you're gonna see on the budget is what has been paid out, and we haven't paid anything out on that yet.
I
Yeah,
like
but you
what
got
said.
$82,000 in liability and $56,000 is coming in from that indigent stuff. So you're still looking at a shortfall of 30-something thousand. And it's how we deal with that shortfall that I'm concerned about. And we can pay it, I guess, out of taxes, but then that's still gonna cut something else short.
Right, like I said,
The way
we-
the budget is set up right now, we've made no allowance for paying that shortfall in the budget.
Given that, we may, we may look at our budget sooner than 6 months. We'll need to, right after we find out all that we need to find out.
So my suggestion would be, and if you need to, I'll take the form of a motion, that over the next 30 days, you let me work on finding out in connection with David, finding out to the penny what we owe and what we can, and come up with a plan to present to you at the next meeting to deal with it.
I think on that too, you're gonna have to talk with Ken. So like, that would be in the motion, is that Eddie and David talk to Ken and get all the figures and whatever. Hopefully a lot of things will be waived and all we'll end up with is just maybe a $10,000 shortfall.
Well, but the 82,000 does not include interest and penalties.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's strictly what's owed.
Is it-
Does not include interest and penalties. Am I right about that, Barb? Yeah, not interest, no interest.
Correct.
So it could be significantly more than that.
Well, but as Ken said, he's pretty confident that he can get most of that waived.
Well, I mean, that's all we can do, we gotta have real figures,
Exactly, that's why, yeah, absolutely real figures.
so
So can we work on that?
I'll make a motion to do that.
Yeah, I make a motion that David and Eddie talk to Ken and see.
Ken and
what
get all the figures
A second.
together and bring them back to the next meeting.
A second that
We'll
motion.
try to have a solution in mind to discuss.
What about your suggestion, start setting that money aside?
Yes.
I think sooner is
Well,
better
yeah.
than later.
Yeah,
I mean, we can complain about all we want, but she can't write a check to nobody unless we got the money in the bank to do it, so.
yeah, and can we do that just in form of suggestion, David, do that with it, or do we want a motion or what?
Do I don't, that's what I said.
That just
because
goes
we
on the
need to-
budget, doesn't it? Or, no, it wouldn't be,
I think
it's
it's
already
Let
budgeted.
us work on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
A comprehensive plan here. Okay.
So y'all gonna look into that part of it too? Good
Yes,
deal.
sir.
Policies on contracting legal counsel. And we started on that a while back. You were gonna write up something,
And, yes, and, go ahead.
no, that was it, you were gonna write up something, present to the board.
Yes, and, the reason I haven't written anything is I talked with Ken right after that, and I said, what would be your guidelines, and of course, and I agree with it, I know it's a money thing, but he said, well, any contract needs to be run through an attorney. I called Safe D to find out if they had some guidelines for across the board, and they said, no, the guy that I talked to, he said, I really can't give you any suggestions on that because I would be practicing law. If we put something in writing to tell you when to contact an attorney, you're practicing law. And there's always that little borderline thing there, so I didn't put anything in writing. But,
You'll be practicing
So
that.
she's not
yeah,
practicing.
because I'm not an attorney. But I think that we might, these are just ideas, anything that, of course, there's the money amount, anything with indemnification provisions where we indemnify them or they indemnify us, we need to make sure those are balanced. That's a very critical part of a contract. And anything saying we're gonna take on liabilities, which is, part of why you have the indemnification provisions. Anything where personnel are involved, like this training thing, where people are gonna be on our ambulances, we have to make sure the insurance coverages are correct. So some of those things we can review and talk about amongst ourselves and agree to, that whether, like the insurance coverage, make sure we're an additional insured and they waive subrogation. We can do those things, and they may not need to go to an attorney, but I think every contract needs to be looked at for those, at least those things. And Eddie and y'all brought up before, like if you're gonna sign something for AT&T telephones, there's not a lot of negotiation there, and there's not personal risk, and it's a standard thing. But like, for instance, if we were to do the payroll thing again, one of them tried to say, we're not responsible for anything that happens with your data or anything else.
Well,
Personal, you can't.
I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think what we're talking about is when we contact
Yes,
an attorney in like emergency situations.
well, that's what
I
I
mean-
was talking about.
I mean,
whenever I was-
that would be like, you would bring those, like, they bring those contracts to the boards, well, we can decide at that board meeting whether we need to contact the attorney. I'm talking about somebody just can't pick up the phone, because they think they have an emergency
That's part of
and
it,
call,
Yeah,
and call Ken and say, hey, this is what's happening, blah, 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 and then spend, half a day emailing them back and forth, and we're collecting $1,000 bill, and nobody else in the organization knows what's going on. I think that's what we're setting here.
that's part of it, that's the second part of it, but what I was talking about too is kind of general guidelines. The second part of it, I think Kay was talking about too, it should come before the board, but in the emergency situations, I don't know, we have to talk about that right now.
Well, I mean, on the original deal, it said whoever felt they have a problem and they think they need to contact an attorney, I mean, the whole thing wasn't written, but part of it was that they would contact another commissioner and they would talk to each other, and then if they said, well, I think we do need to contact an attorney, and then they would bring it to the president, whoever that might be at that time, and then it says, do we need to, and then they would agree and contact the attorney.
So the president.
As
decides.
opposed to, well, it'd be really, you can't even do that, but
No.
there has to be some kind of, where two of them work it out, because you just can't get on the phone and start texting the accountant on a Saturday for 2.5 hours. And the president automatically sees these texts coming through, and like, I see money signs just going out my head and wondering what the heck.
You should be
He
aware.
gave,
Yeah.
he might have given the answer at the very beginning, and that person just wasn't happy with it, so they just kept on and on and on. So, I mean, we just can't afford that.
I agree, you should be aware,
I think basically that any member of the board should be able to contact the attorney if they think it's necessary. I don't think any of us are flighty enough that we would be just running up bills. Everybody's aware of what the cost is per hour for the attorney. But perhaps what you're talking about, maybe the solution to that is if two of us think that we should. I don't like the idea that if I've got an immediate problem, I've got to run down more members of the board. And I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I feel like that I think all of us are rational adults, and nobody's gonna go be.
Well, I've seen this
spending.
happen, that's why and maybe it needs to be two,
Well,
but I've seen it happen. And even when the attorney gave his opinion, that person wasn't happy and just kept on and on and on. So we had a $2,000 bill in our pocket.
I think that the amount that we have budgeted probably for attorney is fairly small.
I mean, it is.
And I think I don't argue with the amount, except that, because I think it makes everybody conscious of how much we might spend. We probably know that we're gonna spend more than that, but I think it keeps us all
How long,
on the idea of saving money, but.
it takes, 72 hours notice for an emergency meeting, is that right? 72 hours.
No, that's for a regular meeting. No.
Well, 72 hours posted notice.
Emergency meeting, I think you only have to get 2 hours.
Well, that's
But
right.
there's certain guidelines that
Yeah.
only you can have an emergency meeting for.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe the solution is unless you know, we've been in an accident or somebody, a patient has gone south and there's a big fuss or something, why couldn't we, before any of us picks up the phone and calls the attorney, why couldn't we call a special, maybe that's the term, a special meeting and let the board meet and go through the normal process? It takes 3 out of 5 to agree on something and as, I mean, we're gonna control expenses. That's one way to do it, is to continue to follow the format and,
Do you think that would be for everyone, or like if somebody thinks, oh, I need an hour with Ken, should we call a meeting for that? Should we have guidelines or for everyone? I mean, I'm good either way, but
I think for everyone,
Well, I think a lot of where you get a fine line is it a board decision, or is it an everyday problem that goes through the office? If that's so, I've got an office manager, he can make that decision now. If it's a board decision we need to make, I can see having an emergency meeting, have a board deal like that, but it's
You know,
it's,
that's
a
good-
lot of
that's
it goes situation by
Yeah.
situation.
Exactly, you can't predict what's gonna happen, and I like what you just said, Grace, because the person most likely to have an emergency that he needs to talk to an attorney
They,
is sitting right over here. So he probably needs to have the ability,
good point.
to
Yeah.
what? To call.
the ability to
Yeah,
call
to call,
Ken in
yeah,
an
you
emergency
need to,
situation. And maybe notify one of us, Carlos perhaps, you know, when he has done it, but I think he needs to be able to
That's a
do
good point,
that.
very good point.
Notify Carla, and then at our next meeting, let us know, just
we
report
can
on
chew
it.
him out then.
Right, not chew him out, no, make us aware of the
Or he
issues.
can call and say, guys, I need
Not
the
too
board
much.
Yeah, I need
to
to y'all make a
assemble,
decision now.
we have
Yeah.
a problem. And,
Well, any of us in an emergency situation, I think, ought to
Right.
be able to, but short
And
of
we
that-
never know an emergency or what, and, hell, there's so many liabilities in this business, we're not gonna know when the emergency's gonna arise. There just is, I mean, you're dealing with human life, so.
Yeah,
So,
more
you know, so
emergency-
far, we've really never had to, that's been a big thing, but, you know,
So-
we don't know when it's coming.
So, yeah, it's better to plan for it than have it slap you behind, slap yourself ahead.
I have a question along that line, David, do you have, like on everyday documents or everyday agreements, do you have some guidelines on, do you ever just sign a document? You really don't, you always bring them to us, don't you?
Yeah, that's not on the
So we don't
documents.
need any yeah, I didn't think so. Okay.
So as far as, if David has emergency, he needs to call Ken, he makes that decision, he does it. If a board member thinks they have an emergency, do they just contact one other board member and say, hey, this is what's going, this is what I feel, that really may not even have nothing to do with the day-to-day operations?
Well, do we need to do some guidelines for what topics, what we're looking at, emergencies or, with the contract,
Well,
we can do that?
But to me, you can do that at any meeting, but I don't really see, I mean, there may be a time, but I don't see any time that a board member would really have a
Couldn't wait
emergency
2
to,
days.
yeah, till the next meeting and put it
Well,
on
like I
the
said,
agenda.
emergency meeting is 2 days, I mean,
Emergency.
if it's pretty bad emergency, you can't wait 2 days to.
Well,
And,
okay.
and then to me, that's most likely gonna be an operations problem.
More likely.
Well, should we run it through David?
What do you mean run it through?
Well, I always
I mean,
think
if
he
we-
needs to be in the loop.
Well, I mean,
I mean,
if one
he's-
of us has an emergency, rather than having a person here in the boardroom, what if we run it through David?
And if David needs to call Ken and see if it's something we need to.
Just give David a little more responsibility
Yeah.
here. Put it on David, so,
Give me an example of what kind of emergency I'm understanding.
I don't know.
Well, that's what I don't
That's-
know.
you
I don't
can't-
either, I've never seen a real emergency come through this board.
You can't wait 2 days.
They couldn't wait till either the next meeting or the,
And I, not to say that it won't happen tomorrow, but I haven't seen it, but I think, like I say, the chief thing is, I never think we wanna leave him. When you got somebody in charge, leaving him out of the loop is a bad deal any way you look at it. has got to be in the loop of everything.
Right.
Even if you don't agree with him on something, but at least he's in the loop as well. David knows about it, so. And I think that's only right for him. I mean, you're asking him to run something, but I think if it's a true emergency that can't wait for 2 days, get a hold of David and say, hey, we got to have an answer right now.
Is that a motion?
And, well, and David calls Ken, or we call Ken, I'm not sure, I'm still not following.
Well, David
David will say, well.
would say, well, that could wait till the meeting, or, you know, because to me, if it ain't a
If
day-to-day
it's not
operation.
affecting your day-to-day operation, it's not an emergency. Cause I mean, if you can't wait the 2 days to call David and say, hey, could you please call a special meeting? You know, we had to give 2 days' notice, call a special meeting, and if he thinks that's warranted, we do that.
I see.
If not,
If it meets all the criteria for a special meeting, then we,
What are the
Special
criteria
meeting.
for a special
well,
meeting?
whatever we say
Whatever
is,
we
I
say.
guess, unfortunately, we don't know what we're doing, so there's the emergency. When we get to where we don't know what we're doing, that's